Hello, I'm Tara Brabazon. I'm the Dean of Graduate Research at Flinders University, and welcome to Vlog 252, Creating a Supervisory Communication System. Oh, this is a big one. I'm asked a great deal, what creates a breakdown in a supervisor's relationship with a student or an advisor's relationship with a student? And I often give two answers, two maxims for your consideration today. 1. Supervisors and students have assumptions. 2. Supervisors and students don't share those assumptions with each other. So therefore the assumptions that students have about their PhD, the assumptions the supervisor has about the nature of a candidature, all of that's okay, all of that's fine. That won't kill a PhD. But unless those assumptions are shared, the relationship is in trouble. Now, isn't it amazing, considering that hypothesis that I present for you today, isn't it amazing, therefore, that we don't teach overtly to supervisors and to students the importance of communication and the communication system? And that's the point of our vlog today. We're going to talk about how to create that system of communication and also how to improve the one that you happen to be in at the moment. So at the end of this vlog that I'm going to present some pretty robust, some strong ideas to you, I'm going to offer 5 simple strategies that you can think about to implement today to transform your relationship just a little bit. And I also did want to dedicate the vlog today to Joel. Hello, Joel. Joel is, I believe, our youngest vlog viewer at 4. So Joel, you often say to your dad, I'm talking right to you. And so Joel, today, I'm talking right to you. Lovely to see you, Joel. And much respect to your remarkable father as well. Joel, I hope you enjoy it. So, this is an area, this communication system between students and supervisors, this is an area of emerging research. Let me talk about it. So I've got amazing respect for an article that appeared last year, so 2020, in the journal Higher Education, written by Gruzdev et al. And it had a brilliant title, Superhero or Hands-Off Supervisor. Superhero or Hands-Off Supervisor. Great title. We've talked about titles, that's one. And they conducted an empirical study of the Russian university system and the relationships between students and supervisors. Fascinating article it is. And they showed, and there's really no surprises here, but still, the empirical study confirmed it, that the hands-off supervisor reported the lowest level of student satisfaction, not a surprise, but they also confirmed the highest time to degree completion. So the longest candidatures and the students were most unhappy with the hands-off supervisor. And then of course they showed the superhero supervisors, as you may have guessed, had the highest levels of student satisfaction and the shortest candidatures. So we had 2 data points there. The next question is the interesting one, their interpretation. So why were these supervisors so good? And they argued, and this was an interesting interpretation I thought, that these supervisors were able to perform, and they described it as the managerial, expert and mentoring functions effectively. So managerial, expert and mentoring functions. So those supervisors enacted those roles well. So this is a fine piece of research, a great empirical study, and I thank the colleagues for doing it. It's tremendous. And it leads into some of the theorising that I'm going to do today for you, because what they show is that every great leader requires a great follower. For every great mentor, there must be a great mentee. And for every expert, there must be a willing listener who holds the disciplinary literacy to manage it. Okay, so with the focus on the dodgy supervisors or the superhero supervisors, we're actually missing the point. We're actually missing the point. Because really, success in this space is not about the supervisor. And you know what? It's not about the student. It's about the space in between them. And in that space in between them, that's where communication takes place. Communication through much of the last 100 years has been understood as a very, very simple process. Indeed, it was called the process school of communication. So, it gets complicated, right? There's a sender of information. There's a receiver of information. So, that's pretty simple. And then the craziness continues. The receiver receives the information as the sender intended. Right, so think about Twitter. Think about text messages. The reason why the process school mode of communication was so wrong is it assumed that the receiver and the sender shared the same context. And of course, this is wrong. Really easy way to disprove a model or a theory because it's clearly wrong. So it was wrong, and through that subsequent 100 years, a series of corrections and very innovative ideas emerged that are sometimes clustered around the words semiotics or social semiotics, structuralism or post-structuralism. Very complicated words, lots of stuff going on there, but they're the movements away from the process school. And these new modes of theorising argued that communication is reliant on the understanding of context and the environment in which communication takes place. So today we're going to talk about communication and communication in context and bringing that context together to configure a strong supervisory relationship. Now, communication skills, pretty sadly, I think, have become like this tick a box thing, right? So, have you got communication skills? Yes, right? And just about every job you apply for, have you got communication skills? Yes, okay. And the problem with that is we take communication for granted, and actually it's a very bespoke, very specific, very advanced skill set. So what is communication? Well, the problem we have is there's the assumption that communication is natural, right? And actually all communication is in context, all communication is constructed. Remember, we don't emerge out of our mother's womb saying, "Hi, my name's Tara, how you going?" We learn. We have to learn language. We learn communication. We don't arrive with it, okay? So it requires a speaker or a writer in context to connect with a listener or a reader, also in a context. So if the context, or if you want to go all posh, if the literacy is not shared, then communication does not take place. Now, mostly, and this is the great problem, we assume that everybody understands us, and further, everybody agrees with us. And think about how often, and I hope I'm not oversharing here, but think about how often we all have these conversations in our head, right? We just endlessly talk to ourselves in our head, and we make a lot of sense in our head, and we agree with ourselves a lot, which is probably a good thing. But also, you know those things where we rehearse endlessly what we should have said, like, "Oh, I should have said that." And so we have these internal dialogues and we assume everyone agrees with us. But we need to remember that the supervisory relationship is part of a workplace. We need to bring it right back to this now. The supervisory relationship is part of a workplace. It is professional communication. Now, professional communication, or Profcom, is its own sub-discipline with a beautiful, very rigorous, very interesting literature. Profcom is very big in North America. I taught it in North America. And there is fine research in this area emerging, particularly for graduate students, right? And I log an article that was published in 2021, so it's just come out, Krishna, Hoffman, Longtin et al. And the title was, interesting title, Rethinking Graduate Student Socialisation and Identification. Again, great title. And Krista argues that communication is actually everything in a doctoral program because it is the foundation of a student's professional identity. So what's happening is, see where the research is leading us, supervisors teach socialisation into academic life through communication. Remember that fine research from Guzdev on the Russian university system that started our gig off today? The superhero supervisors shared their expertise of higher education, but the students have to be open to listening to that information and also pick up literacy, pick up the instrumental communication skills that they're also conveying. Therefore, professional communication requires preparation. So this is why a lot of students and a lot of supervisors recommend the students construct the weekly agenda. So this is what we're talking about in this meeting, or, and this works for me, a list of questions. So when you're going into the weekly or the fortnightly meetings, you have these questions or ideas to structure what we're talking about, and then, and this seems self-evident, but perhaps not, students take notes from those meetings, and then further send follow-up emails asking questions about the concepts or the tropes talked about. So I reviewed my notes, and this bit is still unclear to me. Can we go once more? That's an effective communication system. So this means that the context of students and supervisors, the knowledge system between students and supervisors has a series of structures in place, so we're sharing space, we're sharing literacy, we're sharing time. If there are components of the conversation we don't understand, so the sender and receiver don't share a context, we ask questions to bring those contexts a bit closer. And as you can see, there's these iterative strategies in place to ensure the contexts are shared. So the preparation for a communication moment is absolutely crucial. So preparing for that moment is crucial, and further, feedback at the end of it is also crucial. Right, so we're finding strategies here to connect up the context of the student and the context of the supervisor. So what else can we do to enable this communication? And the answer is, of course, listening. So much of our culture is based on speaking or preparing to speak again. But speaking is not communicating. Speaking is based on listening. And I'll tell you why. Listening is so important because it builds a connection, it builds a relationship, and it also allows you to understand the context of the other person. So listening is not the space before you can talk again. It is a precious opportunity to understand the worldview of another person. And yes, this does mean that your supervisor must really listen to you. And if they don't understand something, they ask questions of you. So most of the time, communication between students and supervisors is effective in some form. But during every candidature, in every workplace, there are what are called difficult conversations. All these different training things are now called difficult conversations. Now, this happens, bad stuff happens in supervision. You're angry, you're frustrated, your supervisor's angry, your supervisor's frustrated, they're shouting, they're slamming doors, there's bad stuff. So how to freak somebody out, and I try to never do this, and people do it to me, how to freak somebody out is they say the immortal sentence, we're about to have a difficult conversation. Are we? Oh, what a great day it is. Okay, that's brilliant. So if we're dealing with anger, if we're dealing with frustration, then my first rule is always let the person have their say, right? Let them get that stuff out. If they need to offload, let them offload. Let them get it out. Let them get it out. But that's when we do have to think about the difference between listening and silence too. Because silence is much more damaging and frightening than anything that anybody can say. Because if someone stays in silence, it's called like the silent treatment, then they're blocking communication because they're not sharing their context with you. Now, I participate in a lot of difficult conversations on a daily basis. So I always, because that's what my job is, Things have gone badly and I've got to try and make it a bit better. So when I'm handling these difficult conversations, firstly, I never call them that, but I start with a series of questions to open the conversation up. So often I start with, how can I be of assistance to you today? What would you like me to know? Or, what is a good resolution for you today? But these situations are tough and they are extraordinary, and I've certainly met my fair share of supervisors, advisors and students that actually don't want any resolution. They don't want improvement. They don't even want an outcome. They just want to sit in a grievance. The complaint becomes the life work and they just can't get out of it. And what happens is these people live in that complaint. They live in the grievance. They become grievance. They become anger. That's what they are. And that means in those cases, and they are frequent, resolutions are just not possible. And that's why we need to nurture our communication systems, because they can be destroyed so easily. The key with communication is always be aware of your audience, be aware of your environment. So I'm going to finish off our gig today with 5 quick ideas for you to think about to improve what you're doing with your supervision today in terms of a communication system. 1, don't assume that your mode of communication that is the most convenient for you is also the most convenient for your supervisor. Don't assume that. For me, interface management is the most important first step in effective communication. So what that means is choose your platform of communication well. Do not assume that the mode of communication in which you are literate and comfortable is the mode of communication in which your supervisor is literate and comfortable. So at the start of your candidature, talk about overtly the best modes of communication and find that interface that you both share and you're both comfortable to use. 2, don't assume that the quickest mode of communication is the best. We live in an age, sadly, where convenience is more important than quality, and speed is more important than clarity. Don't ever hurry or hasten your mode of communication. Don't ever throw off the angry email. Don't ever do that. Don't send off a random text message on the weekend. Your relationship with your supervisor is part of organisational culture. It is professional communication, and it requires calm, reflexive, considered communication needs. I have a maxim that I use in my professional life, and remember, I deal with a minimum of 10 crises a day. I dealt with 40 yesterday. It was a big day. But my maxim, my rule is the more important crisis, the more important something is, the more time has to go into that initial communication moment. Because when you're in a situation, it's a crisis, spend some time and craft what you're going to do in that first communication response, because that will set the tone for the entire communication system. So therefore, when you're in the middle of a crisis, don't go bang, send off, a crazy email or a text message or something weird. Stop. Something bad is happening. Take a breath. What is the best strategy to handle this, to calm the situation and get a resolution? Spend some time, take a breath, craft that first communication moment with care. And that will summon an effective system that'll get you to a resolution. 3, value. Really value synchronous communication and recognise how asynchronous communication can enable it. Right, so synchronous, real time. Meetings in real time are important. They're precious. Remember, all our research shows students that have weekly meetings finish quickly. But the research also shows that it doesn't matter if that face-to-face synchronous meeting is digitally or via analogue communication. So it doesn't make any difference if it's via Skype or it's in an office. Doesn't matter, as long as it's synchronous and face-to-face. So do really value, care about, nurture that face-to-face time and create many asynchronous, not in real time, asynchronous feeders into it. So prepare for the meeting carefully, think about the meeting afterwards, frame the synchronous meeting, and make every meeting count. Prepare the agenda, you may want to share that with your supervisor, and yes, deliver written work. If it helps you, I always used to approach my meetings, and I actually still do with people that are important to me, with say 5 questions. So I come in with, okay, these are 5 areas I'm interested in. Let me gain your advice and your expertise on these 5 areas. So questions can be quite useful. 4, formalise your communication. Write every email as if your boss or your mother will read it. Formalise your communication. The consequences, I think, of Facebook, of Twitter, of text messaging, is that we communicate with everybody like they're our girlfriend or our drug dealer. So make a decision to formalise your correspondence with university colleagues. Really, formalise it today. Your supervisor is not your drug dealer. Yo bro, how's it hanging? Yeah, no. Put it a different way, and I wish I was joking, but I'm not these days. Every message I write, I assume it is going to be read in court. Every email I write, I assume it's going to be read in court. When letters and faxes were written in the olden days, they had a formal quality, and that was good. Okay, this is a fax. It's like, So it had formality as part of the interface. But as email started to be used in leisure and work, there started to be this weird blurring between email and text messaging and Facebook and direct messaging, and that blurring really was problematic. So make a decision today to formalise your emails. Australians have a tendency, it's a bad tendency, to formalise, they have a tendency to attach and align about half of South Australia in the CC line of every email they write. So I'm writing an email, and you know what, I'm so clever, let me share this with half of South Australia, right? You look at people's CC lines and you go, do these people firstly A, care, but B, are you aware now that every person you've sent an email to could send it to another 5, 10, 15 people, and then suddenly everybody knows your business? Are you sure that was the point there? So always ask, when you're looking at an email, never just write it and send it, ever. Read it, have a think, have a breath, have a sip of coffee, and the most important questions to ask yourself about an email are you happy if your boss reads this? Because trust me, in many cases these days, your boss will. And also realise that the misreading of emails is a site of incredible conflict between students and supervisors. Now, think about it from my perspective, if this is helpful. Each year, hundreds, and I mean hundreds, we might even be in thousands, hundreds of emails are forwarded to me as Dean by seriously angry students or supervisors. And they explain to me, they send the email on and say, this email is a deal breaker for me, this relationship is over. And of course, I read the email, I wasn't in the context, I read the email and I look at it and mostly I'm horrified. I read that email and I think, yeah, it's over. That's horrific. That is horrific. But again, there's an assumption in the process school of communication that I, as a sender, will send this to the receiver and they'll get it in the way I've sent it. And that particularly occurs very badly with humour. So somebody sends a meme, sends a joke to somebody, forwards an email, and the person they send it to finds it offensive. They send it on to me and say, this is unprofessional communication. And I agree with them. Don't do it. Don't do it, it's wrong. Because you can't share content if you don't share context. If you don't share a context, you can't share content. And of course, with inverted commas, humour, that's the point. 5. Don't assume that your supervisor is available to respond to your message. This is the final difficult truth, this one. We all want our supervisors to be superheroes. But Batman has left Gotham City and Superman has been bowed by the kryptonite of COVID. Your supervisors, like most academics throughout the university sector around the world, are very, very tired. They're exhausted. And remember, the research before COVID showed that the average academic works 60 hours a week. So they don't get days off, they don't get holidays, their family and their friends are neglected. So if your supervisor hasn't replied to that email, I'm really sorry about that. If your supervisor hasn't drafted that chapter, I'm really sorry about that. But that's the point about understanding the context to enable communication. Ask your supervisor about their timetable. And for the supervisors who are watching this gig today, hi team, share your timetable with your students. Now I understand where we've all come from, and I used to share this mode up to a couple of years ago. We've always tried to protect our students from the excesses of higher education. We've always tried to do that, to give them a look at the best of a university, right? But that's no longer possible. So what I do with my PhD students is I give my PhD students my drafting schedule for the week. So when a student on Monday, hi Alyssa, gives me a piece of work to read, I say to Alyssa, that's great, that's fantastic. I do have 2 PhDs to read this week, about 200,000 words. I've positioned that on Monday afternoon, Monday night, Wednesday afternoon, Wednesday night. So I should get to your chapter on Thursday. Is that okay? Right? So share the timetable with your students. For the students, ask your supervisors how their drafting schedule is going. So if a student expects to receive a chapter the next day, they are mistaken. And just to give you the worst example of a student's use of communication systems with a supervisor, and I'm expressing this because it happened to me, a student gave me a draft on Christmas Eve and sent me a tweet on Christmas Day asking where the chapter was. Now, I did actually get that chapter back to the student on Boxing Day, but think about professional communication. Christmas Eve, sent me a chapter. Christmas Day, a public tweet, hi Tara, where's my chapter? Right? So let's really be kind and decent and enable the communication by understanding each other's context. So for students and supervisors, it is time to talk about the reality of higher education. It is time to talk about the reality of your week. And through that reality and shared reality, we'll create a better shared communication system. And that enables reflection from supervisors and reflection from students. I wish you love, light and peace. Tea out.